Hello, students, and here I am back with you with another lecture called Commercial Cinema as a Medium for Development. Now, before I begin, let's talk about the definition of development. Development is primarily a new attitude towards the treatment of a certain subject. But when I talk about development, of course, there's a other side to the coin as well. And I'm sure you have guessed it correctly that the other side of the coin of development is propaganda. So, before we talk about cinema and development, let's talk about cinema and propaganda. Of course, if we not talk about cinema and we talk about media in general, you have come across several instances where you must have found that cinema being you or that media being used as a tool for propaganda. Right? I'm not going into that. But when I talk about particularly about cinema, one of my favorite example of cinema and propaganda is not something related to Indian media for a change, but rather I talk about a particular North Korean leader called Kim Jong-il. If you know about this particular personality, he's a very interesting personality, and he was, before becoming a politician, he was a filmmaker. And what he did was, in the films he made, in which he kind of portrayed himself as larger than life, almost like godlike. So he could do miraculous thing, wondrous thing in the films which he made. And, the reason why he kind of used these films and the reason why he portrayed himself in this godlike mannerism in his films, so that when people watch these films, they almost kind of see him godlike. And thereafter, of course, the films played a major role in creation of his image. So I have given a very far-fetched example to you, but of course in our day-to-day life we know, from politicians to stars to literally everyone in contemporary times uses media as a tool for creating a brand, creating an image, and also kind of to put forward certain ideologies, to put forward certain ideas as a means of propaganda, as so on. So here I gave you example of Kim Jong-il. Please look into this person, and he was a director first and a dictator second, right? A dictator who used cinema to propagate his larger than life image in his films, and these films, my dear students, were very much instrumental in him coming to power. Now here we spoke about cinema and propaganda, right? And now we are going to talk about cinema and development. Can cinema be used as a tool for development or not? Of course, in our previous lecture, we were speaking about the modeling theory, remember? The fact that media creates certain cultural norms. And therefore, of course, using the same theories, we can also say that what we see in media, we kind of imbibe those ideas in our day-to-day life. Right? We kind of, those ideas, those thoughts which are portrayed in films become sort of acceptable for us. And here comes the narrative of development. So when we say the thoughts and ideas being portrayed in movies becoming acceptable to us, these acceptance can be in two ways. So one is, cinema can put forward very regressive ideas, very regressive thought process, and we can then imbibe those thought process. We can imbibe those ideas in our day-to-day life. On the other hand, cinema can also be an eye-opener, right? With films which kind of take the role of a developmental tool, which kind of bring forward new ideas, right, to us in form of a packaged as a film. In order to elaborate this, let's just watch one such examples. And I want you to watch the trailer, and I want you to watch the complete trailer of the film called Onik, which was released in this very year.
इंडिया मैं इसी इंडिया की सुरक्षा के लिए काम करता हूँ। नॉर्थ ईस्ट इंडिया में, नॉर्थ ईस्ट मतलब वेस्ट बंगाल के पूर्वी साइड वाला इंडिया। मिशन था टाइगर सांगा और इंडियन गवर्नमेंट के बीच शांति समझौता करवाने में मदद करना।
पार्लर वाली है? हाँ, या ये पार्लर है? अगर आइडिया को भी टीम में ले लेते हैं तो ये टीम जो है इंडियन बनेगी या चाइनीज है?
हमको चिंकी बुलाते हैं। We did not want India here.
नॉर्थ ईस्ट में 30 से 40 एक्टिव अलगाववादी ग्रुप्स थे। अचानक एक ग्रुप ज्यादा एक्टिव हो गया, जॉनसन। सच सच बताओ, किसके लिए हथियार मंगवा रहे हो?
मेरे साथ चलो, मैं बाहर निकाल लूंगा।
जहाँ से खुद निकलना नहीं आता वहाँ जाता नहीं मैं।
पापा बोलता है हम लोग इंडियन नहीं है, इसीलिए मुझे इंडिया की टीम के लिए खेलना है।
मैं तेरी फाइट के लिए चेयर नहीं कर सकता, तुम मेरे फाइट के लिए चेयर नहीं कर सकती। हम सब ऐसे ट्रेजेडी में रहते हैं।
I'm sure you liked Onik, right? So what is Onik? Onik is a deeply political film. I'm sure you agree with me. Even the trailer itself, even if you haven't seen the film, is indicative of the same. So it's a deeply political film that asks people why a certain part of the country, and of course we are talking about the Northeast here, have to repeatedly prove their love and worthiness for the country, that is this for India. And it echoes this deep-seated distrust of the sections of the Northeast people. I am kind of quoting a dialogue from the film. Are we going after guns and ignoring the shoulders that are being used? Wonders the morally ambiguous protagonist in the film. So even not only just the visuals, not only the fact that it included Northeastern people in the ambit of cinema, of Hindi cinema, but also the dialogues were very much indicative of the angst of the Northeast people who are repeatedly referred as chinkies and often kind of not regarded inherently a part of the country. Onik Aman, that is the central protagonist of the film, feels that government should talk to the group, that is the people's voice, but finds that his boss, Abrar Bhatt, right, is more interested in winning over the groups that creates the noise and bloodshed. So I'm not going into the narrative of the film, but please go ahead and watch the film. And the film is indicative of very deep-rooted deep-rooted politics which goes on in the northeast part of the country. So here I'm not just talking about the narrative, but the very fact that the film includes Northeast, a story about Northeast, and not just the story, but the lead protagonist. That is, of course, Ayushmann Khurrana does not belong to Northeast. He's a Bombay film star, but the lead actress of the film was very much from Northeast itself. Northeast, as we all know, since Indian independence, has been facing a lot of rebellion and is often, there has been demands of separation from the mainland India. Northeastern people have faced extreme racism in our own country. We are not unaware of this. And during the pandemic, there were reports of people hurling abuse at Northeastern community, blaming them that the virus has come from them and they are Chinese and so on and so forth. Right? Now, a film for the first time, and when I say film, I'm not talking about an art film for a change, or I'm not talking about a parallel film or a parallel cinema. I'm here talking about mainstream commercial cinema with actors such as Ayushmann Khurrana who are portraying the story of Northeast. Now, this is very interesting, and of course, I kind of correlate this with development because if you look at news, right? Forget about cinema. If you look at news, I can challenge you that if you take a primetime 9 o'clock news, how many of the news coverage belong to the Northeast? So Northeast have always been typically the other, right? The other, and this other often being excluded from news media, from print media. The other is irrelevant. The other is not so important. So when cinema brings the other into its ambit, it is definitely a marker of a social change. And it's not just, the film Onik. There are other films as well. So for example, Village Rockstar. Right, Village Rockstar is a 2017 Indian Assamese language coming-of-age drama written and edited, co-produced and directed by Reema Das, who is a self-taught filmmaker. The story follows a 10-year-old girl who befriends a group of boys and dreams of becoming a rock star. The film premiered in the 2017 Toronto International Film Festival, and more significantly, it received the Best Feature Film Swarna Kamal Award at the 65th National Film Award. Now, the reason I'm kind of taking so many names is because, again, Village Rockstar is a classic example, even though it's not a mainstream Hindi film. But I still felt it should be mentioned, that which brings Northeast into the ambit of cinema. So Onyx is a classic example of how cinema is inherently correlated to development, because the moment visuals, the moment images of Northeast, the moment stories about Northeast come into the mainstream, become the mainstream voice, obviously and immediately it echoes the ethos of development. On this note, I have a small quiz for you, my dear students. I want you to answer who is the director of the film Onik, that is the film you just saw the trailer of. Is the director Anubhav Sinha, or Anurag Kashyap, or Madhur Bhandarkar, or Salim Javed? The correct answer to this question is none other than Anubhav Sinha. Students, I want you to note down another example.
हम कभी हरिजन हो जाते हैं, कभी बहुजन हो जाते हैं, बस जन नहीं बन पा रहे हैं कि जनगण मन में हमारी भी गिनती हो जाए। इंसाफ की भीख मत मांगो, बहुत मांग चुके हैं।
कजन थी दोनों लड़कियां, दोनों में संबंध था, दोनों के बाप मिलकर लटका दिए।
तीसरी बच्ची का है?
हाँ सर, उसका कुछ पता नहीं चल रहा।
ये भी दलित है क्या?
तुम्हें एक हीरो चाहिए अदिति।
हीरो नहीं चाहिए आयान, बस ऐसे लोग चाहिए जो हीरो का वेट ना करें।
एफआईआर लिखी अब तक?
सर केस इतना सीरियस लग नहीं रहा था सर।
कब लगता सीरियस?
इन लोगों के तो झूठे केसेस आते रहते हैं सर।
ऑनर किलिंग है।
हमारी लड़कियों का हत्या हुआ है साहब, और हम ही पे केस बना रहे हैं साहब।
अंशु नारी आप थप्पड़ मारा था पूजा को। दिहाड़ी में 3 रुपए बढ़ाने को बोली थी वो लोग।
कितने रुपए?
3 रुपए।
अंशु नाहरिया कौन है?
औकात में नहीं रखेंगे सर, काम ही नहीं कर सकते।
और औकात क्या है?
जो हम देते हैं वही औकात है सर।
This particular film, which you just saw the trailer of, Article 15, of course, is indicative of the Article 15 of the Constitution of India, which prohibits discrimination against the ground of religion, caste, race, sex, and so on. Now, this particular film is about the disappearance of 2 Dalit girls, right, who were trapped in a school bus by men. So, in the process of the search of these 2 Dalit girls, we come across issues such as caste-based discrimination, class-based discrimination, and particularly caste-based discrimination, and so on and so forth. Once again, this particular film, which is indicative of caste-based politics prevalent in our country, became a part and parcel and was applauded in film festivals across the globe, as well as not only that, it also was a commercial hit. Now, once again, a film like Article 15, starring a mainstream actor like Ayushmann Khurrana, is kind of very much indicative of what I was just talking about, in the sense, very much indicative of the fact that how development is being intertwined into the ambit of commercial cinema. Now, let me talk about a little bit that how was all this possible? Right? How or why suddenly these narratives, and of course, once again, I'm talking about Hindi cinema, that how such development-oriented narratives became part and parcel of the mainstream cinema. So earlier, there were single-screen theaters. I'm talking about the economics behind it as well. With single-screen theaters, it was important for filmmakers to make films which inherently catered to masses, right? Of course, because there were 60 or 100 seats which needed to be filled. So at this point of time, films like Amitabh Bachchan films like Diwar, Zanjeer, these are the kind of films which were extremely popular, as these films did not cater to a niche audience, but rather was a mass entertainment sort of thing. Now next, after single screen theatres comes the time frame of multiplexes. Now with multiplex, we suddenly start watching, or we suddenly start seeing a different kind of films being made. Films like Well Done Abba, films like Being Cyrus, become popular at this point of time. Let's talk about Weldon Abba. Weldon Abba is a political satire, right, which revolves around the fact that a group of villagers report against the theft of a particular well, which apparently was never made. But then, since it was said that the well kind of disappeared, they kind of fired a theft case because the theft of the well, and so on and so forth. It's a very interesting narrative. So such narratives, for the first time, a film like Weldon Abba for the first time came into being with the arrival of multiplexes. Was kind of the beginning of the time when a certain kind of films being started made for a very, very niche audience, right? And thereafter, after multiplex, came the time of the OTT. Now, OTT, that is over the top platforms, is a very interesting platform, right? It's a subscription based platform, as you are aware of it. And of course, the content need not be a content which is meant for a large scale audience. With the arrival of OTT, we suddenly find that a new ecosystem of cinema came into being, because for the first time, filmmakers were making small budget films. Of course, with multiplex also, initially that was the cause. Initially, small budget films were being made and released in multiplexes for a very niche audience. But later on, this is the time frame I'm talking about, is early 2000. But by the time after this initial time frame of the arrival of multiplexes also became a means of, or it rather became a generalized means of film viewing. So then it went on to making, big scale, big budget films. So today also, when we watch, we rather, all the big budget films are released in theater. But during the pandemic, a different model came into being, right? And the model being referred as the OTT first release model, right? Or rather, if we don't talk about the model, OTT itself became a platform where filmmakers could make films for inherently lesser budget and sell films for lesser budget to an OTT platform. And this kind of brought forward very different kind of films, because filmmakers were making very socially conscious films. They were telling stories which they wanted to say. And of course, when I say filmmakers, I'm giving constantly the example of one filmmaker and one star, that is Anubhav Sinha and Ayushmann Khurrana. And Ayushmann Khurrana, in fact, later has made these series of films. And these films primarily geared, even though some of these films are released in multiplexes, but the films primarily geared to a socially conscious, OTT audience, right? So it is also, OTT kind of also brings forward a new kind of audience, right, when it comes to cinema. And this new sort of audience, or the audience which is a conscious audience, kind of accepts touch stories which are development oriented. So a film like Onik or a film like Article 15 might not have been possible in a different ecosystem. That is where multiplexes where are there, and then big budget films need to be made, and so on and so forth. But in this new ecosystem, that is what we are calling as the OTT ecosystem, right? It is rather easy to make a film which will just appeal to a new niche audience. And this is a wonderful time for where we can see not just the examples which I have given, but so many films, right? So many films geared towards development being brought into the ambit of commercial cinema, not just Hindi cinema, commercial cinema. If you want examples, I can give you more examples. So there are so many films about women empowerment now. A film like Queen, for example, where a single woman goes for a honeymoon all by herself. Or a film like Piku, where a daughter takes the responsibility of taking care of her father, which is very, very atypical of an Indian society, where men are traditionally given the role of the caretaker of the elderly. So it's for the first time that single-handedly a woman is being shown. Now, such things, it's not that such things never are not there in Indian society at all. It's there, but it's just that mainstream cinema never picked up these ideas. It was rather a taboo for them. Or a very stark film like Lipstick Under the Burqa, which talks about the sexuality of an elderly woman. Once again, a very, very taboo subject for Indian society. But these are the stories which are inherently, when we talk about development, these are the stories which are indicative or which kind of can bring forward the development which we are talking about. Or, for example, a national sense of nationalism, which is there in, for example, Nirja, or a film like Gunjan Saxena, and all of these are revolve around women, right? Women playing fantastic roles, and so on and so forth. With this, I bring forth a quiz. Which of the following film is based on women empowerment? Is it Lipstick Under the Burqa? Is it Diwar? Is it Zanjeer? Or is it Jodha Akbar? The correct answer is, of course, the film Lipstick Under the Burqa. Welcome back, students. So when you were pondering upon the quiz, I was trying to look into an apt definition to give you for development journalism. And you might be thinking that suddenly I am switching from cinema to journalism. Yes, indeed, I'm switching from one to another, but that's because I want to connect both of them. So what is development journalism? Development journalism is a type of reporting and writing on topics related to the process of economic development. When we come to cinema and development, it is rather playing or working upon the same role as development journalist or development journalism as a framework. That is, it is trying to it is trying to portray topics, or it's trying to talk about topics which are related to the process of development. So essentially, these films, certain films, and when I say cinema, I'm not saying that all films are doing so. In fact, there is, with the coming of OTT and the multiplexes thriving side by side, there's a stark demarcation between what we called OTT films and what we called spectacle-based mainstream cinema, in the sense that a lot of films which are primarily spectacle-based are coming into prominence. Right? And these films are particularly geared towards a multiplex audience. These films are supposed to be consumed and enjoyed in the dark hall of theaters. So, of course, and they're very much mainstream films. They're very much mainstream. They're big budget films. But so such films definitely exist. But on the other hand of it, we see a certain category of films where the idea of the film is to promote growth and development. And I cannot finish this lecture without taking the name of one particular film which I saw recently, the film being Janhit Mein Jari. The film is about a young girl who is a crusader and takes the difficult job of selling condoms. The film shows the struggle she faces amid the social taboos and how she overcomes resistance from her family and the society. Now look at the topic. It is something which is extremely a taboo subject, right, for Indian film audience or for Indian filmmakers to make such a film. Right? So definitely the audience has changed. But along with that, I think the entire ecosystem of cinema has changed with the OTT and kind of the proliferation of these small budget films in OTT, which has bring such narratives into mainstream Hindi cinema. Right? And also to end this lecture, the narratives are based on, so for example, the film Janhit Mein Jari is not based in a Delhi or a Bombay or a Calcutta. It is based in Madhya Pradesh, right? So all these films, most of these films which are geared towards development, so for example, Onik, as I said, is about Northeast, right? Which is by itself the other, right? Not often being neglected in mainstream news and so on and so forth. Similarly, these smaller cities are also often neglected in news media. So Hindi cinema for the first time bringing these smallest stories, bringing narratives about the problems, about the people of these smaller cities and so on and so forth, is very much indicative of cinema being used as a mainstream cinema, and I'm not just saying cinema in the scope of entirety, so mainstream cinema being used as a tool for development. With this, I bid you goodbye. Thank you.